recording as well. Good afternoon and welcome to the Teacher Toolbox workshop series. Today's topic is Navigating Information and Technology Standards. My name is Dan Zuberbeer and I'm the Education and Instructional Technology Librarian in Joyner Library's Teaching Resources Center. Really that big long job title, it means two things. One, assisting the College of Education and their students and faculty members with their research needs. And then the instructional technology part is I get to play with some tools, some toys. The big needs here at ECU still seems to be smart boards for one, and then also I manage Joyner Library's 3D printing service, and so I work with a number of faculty members over in the College of Education and introduce introduce them and their students to 3D printing. So without further ado, let's get started. Now there's just a couple of housekeeping items. The first is some of you have already found it, but that purple tab in the bottom right hand corner, that's your way to interact with me. That will open up the chat box and you'll be able to see who else is attending today. The other way you can interact with me is with that little widget down at the bottom of your screen with the hand raised. So if you do have a question, you can ask it. Let me know that way, especially if I don't see your question in the chat box right away. And I do want to remind you of our other Teacher Toolbox workshops coming up. Since you're here, it means you've signed up for it, and so you, whoops. There, that's better. So you can see what I'm talking about. You already know how to sign up. Just a reminder of other sessions coming up. My next session is co-teaching with the school librarian, and I'll talk a little bit about that today when we cover the American Association for School Librarians standards for the 21st century learner. But there's a lot of good things coming up for the rest of the semester. Also a reminder, if you haven't done so already, we're trying, myself and the instructional technology consultants that I work with over in the College of Education, Jason Whited and Holly Fales, we're trying to develop a professional learning community amongst educators in Eastern North Carolina by starting this blog. It's still in its infancy, but we hope it can be a place educators in the Latham Clinical Schools Network can go to for help, not just from us, but from each other, and just expand your professional learning network. So we'll get right to it. Today's takeaways. We'll talk very briefly about, just because it's a review of the purpose of standards, just a slight historical context behind it as well. We'll also define what teachers need to know about digital learning by looking at the International Society for Technology and Education Student Standards, the American Association of School Librarians Standards for the 21st Century Learner, and the North Carolina Information and Technology Essential Standards. We're going to look at those from the student perspective, and then we'll tie all of that stuff in at the end to the teacher evaluation rubric, and hopefully give you guys some ideas on how you can use these standards and get the wheels turning a little bit, and how you can use them to help your students create meaningful learning experiences for them first and foremost, but also use the artifacts that your students create, or the lesson plans or activities that you use as artifacts as a part of your evaluation that you can submit. The other thing, or the final thing I'm going to do throughout today's session, you'll see at the bottom of your screen in purple, it says find connections to the NC Digital Learning competencies for teachers. Everything that's in purple throughout today's session is going to tie into those in some way, shape, or form. Or if you're not clear as to how, I don't make it clear, please let me know, and I'll expand on things a little bit. So I'll hide myself because I don't like looking at myself in very tiny format, and we'll get going. We'll start with the ISTE standards, or with a review of why academic standards. So really, academic standards came out, started late 1800s, early 1900s. Sorry, I got to pop up. Late 1800s, early 1900s, because there was concern over the educational achievement of students. So in that respect, not a lot has changed in the last 100 or so years. And what happened was states had their own standards, developed their own standards, and that was the way it was for about 100 years or so, until the Common Core state standards came about 6 or 7 years ago now. And that showed a marked change from what was before. And I'll give you an example of something that could have happened. When I was a social studies teacher in Arizona, one of my colleagues had moved to Arizona from Texas, and they had, their oldest son was in 8th grade when they moved, and he hated school in Arizona. He was frustrated, he was bored, and once they got down to the core reason as to why he was bored and why he didn't like school so much, he said, "Mom, I learned all this in 5th grade back in Texas." And so and that was quite common. And that was one of the things that the Common Core state standards, no matter what you think about them, that was one of the things the Common Core state standards was trying to fix. And so, but you're with the Common Core in math, in English language arts, and we're going to start to see a push for a common set of standards in science with the next gen standards, and social studies coming down the pipeline as well. And I don't think these types of standards are going to go away, where what one state does is going to be pretty similar, whether you call it the Common Core or not. It's going to be pretty similar to what happens and what is being taught in the state right next door, or all the way across the country. So these are standards for students, and that's what the focus is right here. But the real reason why, or the best thing, I'm getting ahead of myself, how to differentiate between good standards and bad standards. Good standards are consistent, they leave little room for doubt, and are clearly and simply stated. They're consistent, they leave little room for doubt, and are clearly and simply stated. And at the same time, they define the knowledge and skills students should have at critical points in their educational career. And so that's why in a lot of states, like North Carolina, have end of grade tests. and it's not every year, it's just at specific points. And so there's a lot going on in these standards, but we need to look for consistency, leave little room for doubt, clearly and simply stated. And in two of the three sets of standards we're going to look at today, we find that for the most part. Some leave some room for doubt, and we'll talk about that as we move along. But the other thing we want to look at is, or keep in mind, no matter what set of standards we look at, standards are going to clarify aims of a particular group. And so that invites a little bit of bias into how the standards are written. So even when you look at the National Research Council definition of standard, even that first line shows and clarifies aims of that particular group. Serve as a basis of educational reform. Those two words, educational reform, are pretty loaded nowadays. There's been educational reform movements for decades in the United States, but the last 5 or 7 years, we really start to see this push on educational reform, whether it's through charter schools or the Common Core or online schools like K-12 or Connections Education here in North Carolina and in other states. There's a lot of push for that reform, and everybody's got an idea. And a lot of it comes down to people thinking education hasn't changed in the last 100 years. My argument to that is they haven't been in a classroom lately. A lot has changed in how teachers teach their students and create meaningful learning activities and learning experiences for their students, and also on the types of work students produce. Things have changed. They're just looking at things through a different set of lenses than what educators are. So I don't need to really go into this too much, but I'm sure all of you know about your teaching standards. They're all there for different subject areas, for teacher education, for reading professionals, and so on and so forth. So it's not just for students. Teachers also have a set of standards that kind of guide their professional foundation. So let's get right into the ISTE standards. So they recently received a refresh back last year in 2016. The previous refresh was 2007, and before that, 1998. Set of standards, what they say is that provides a framework for amplifying or transforming digital age learning, teaching, and leading. They also give each other a set of, it's a support structure, clear guidelines on what they believe students need to learn and do to be successful in the digital or information age that we're in right now. So that's the ISTE standards in a nutshell. And I want to touch on some of the good and some of the bad before we look at, take a little bit of a closer look at the 2016 ISTE standards. So the good, just like the 2007 standards, the 2016 standards are vendor and tool agnostic, meaning they don't endorse specific tools or companies. They focus solely on learning and professional skills. And so it allows teachers to choose from a wide array of tools to implement in their classroom. It allows for students to use a broad array of tools in the classroom or in their personal life. And so that's great. When we think of Google, for example, if they started endorsing a specific Google tool, we think Google, it's a big company, it's not going anywhere anytime soon. but there are websites dedicated to all of the tools and technologies that Google started and then pulled the plug on and killed them off. And they number in the dozens. It's over. The last time I looked, it was over 100 tools Google had, but they no longer support. And so even big companies with big names and broad reaches into education, they can stop supporting specific tools for any reason. Or take Evernote as an example. Late this last year, Evernote decided you can only use your account on 2 devices, whether it's a laptop, a desktop computer, or your mobile phone. So I used to have Evernote, and I used it on my work computer. I used it on my home computer. I manage the 3 print studio here at Joiner Library. I used it my account on those computers. I used it on my mobile phone. So I was well above. I have used it on 3 or 4, maybe even 5 different devices. Evernote decided that if you or log into your Evernote account on more than 2 devices, you have to pay for premium service, which is $50 a year. And I said no. I no longer use Evernote anymore. And that put a lot of schools in a bind because students would use Evernote on their Chromebook at school. They'd use it on a desktop computer or laptop at home, and they would also use Evernote on their mobile device. So that's 3 screens. You'd have to pay the premium for it. And schools, nor the students, were willing to do that. And so they lost a fair amount of business, I imagine, from the education sector. And so even just little changes like that can create ripple effects. And so that's one of the reasons why ISTE doesn't endorse any specific tools or companies. So, but that focus on learning and professional skills does reflect the modern realities and the lessons learned over the last 10 years, which is good. Right? When they're trying to give educators the tools to help their students be prepared for situations that they weren't explicitly prepared for. All right, here's a problem. You've never used this piece of technology before. Figure it out. I'll help you, but you still need to figure it out on your own. And so that's one of the things that I'll mention and re-mention as we move along today. Preparing students for particular situations that they weren't specifically prepared for. And that reflects a lot of the modern realities in the world of work today. They are clearly and simply stated. I'll flip them up on the screen in a second, and you'll see that. They also have technology implementation scenarios, which is a good deal. They sell them in an ebook right now. I just double-checked it this afternoon. For ISTE members, it's $9. If you're not a member, it's $10. But I've heard from previous editions, from the last edition, 2007, when they published their last implementation scenarios, they're pretty basic. You would get, I think you can save yourself $10 and lean on your professional learning network, teacher blogs that you follow. You probably find just as good, if not better, resources from your network of colleagues on Twitter than you would out of the technology implementation scenarios. So that's also one of the not so good things. One of the other not so good things about the ISTE standards for students is that they're still a bit technocentric. It's not as bad as it was 9 or 10 years ago with the 2007 standards, but technocentrism is the fallacy of referring all questions to the technology. It's technology can answer all questions. Why can't the student do this? Well, there was something wrong with the technology. Why did the student do this? Or succeed? Or why were students so engaged? Why were students so motivated? Oh, it's because of the technology. So it's that technocentrism is where technology is the answer. And that also leads to verbal inflation. So very closely related to technocentrism, it's the common practice of inflating the significance of an educational practice simply because it uses technology. A very basic example of that I can give you, instead of using Microsoft PowerPoint, that's the old way of doing it. Now we use Prezi or Google Slides or any other number of web resources, web presentation tools, or presentation tools in a mobile app, Nearpod. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I do have some issues with Nearpod. But it's saying things are going so well, and it's because of the technology. And what really should be taken into account is the teacher's pedagogical choices in developing the learning activity and using the most appropriate technology for that learning activity. It's probably, the teacher doesn't get enough credit in that scenario. The final thing with the ISTE standards is that they're observations and not insight. What I mean by that is over the last 10 years, ISTE keeps a very close eye on the trends and fads in K-12 educational technology. And so what these standards are is that it reflects those trends, those observations. And it doesn't take a look forward into the future 5-10 years down the road and how student learning could change. One thing that might throw some of these ISTE standards under the bus is the use of open educational resources and other open educational practices and pedagogies that teachers might use in the next few years. It could make some of these standards obsolete. So the standards, and I'll actually kick these up here. The biggest change is on the left you see 5 out of the 6 really align well and match well to the digital learning competencies for classroom teachers. The 2016 standards, all 7, align pretty well. The real big change is that the technology operations and concepts that you see from the 2007 standards are gone in the newest edition. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the communication and collaboration get split into 2 separate standards in the newest edition of them, as you see in number 6 and number 7. So in my opinion, the 2016 standards, they're bigger, they're more idealistic. They're, rather than focusing on a narrow set of skills that the 2007 standards did, the 2007 standards were pretty prescriptive and focused on students developing a very specific set of skills using technology and still leaning towards learning how to use it. And so the new ones, more bigger, more idealistic, which can be good and bad. The specific skill sets are still there, but the new standards it's an attempt to reflect on the past and show those observations and be a part of the ongoing discussion of deeper learning. And so because of that, there's connections and overlap between all 7 of these standards. So let's let's take a look at those ISTE standards. And so one of the things I'll show you, and I'll kick this link out to you real quick. One thing about the standards, you do need to register and hand over some of your personal information to be able to download them, which is unfortunate. But if you email me and ask me very nicely, I'd be more than happy to send you the PDF. But scrolling down the page here, here's how they characterize the changes in the last 20 years or so. The first set of standards in 1998 is heavily focused on students picking up those skills and learning how to use the technology. And we start to see a transition in 2007. Those specific skill sets are still there, but starting to reimagine how using appropriate technologies in the classroom can affect the student learning experience. And so now they're saying they believe that technology can transform learning, which it can when used appropriately. And I think the 2016 standards here, whoops, I'll scroll all the way back up to the top. Those standards can really get the wheels turning in teachers, and they provide a lot of examples and offer a lot of ideas that teachers can use in the classroom. But I think one of the things you'll find is that you might already do a lot of these things in your classroom. Let me repeat that, because I think you'll see that as we move along. You'll probably be able to do many of these things in your classroom. You just didn't know that they were part of information and technology standards. So the empowered learner, over on the left-hand side of your screen, focuses mainly on agency and voice, and developing that in your students. Students themselves articulating and setting personal learning goals with the guidance of teachers, of course, but making it personal. They're choosing them themselves. They develop their own strategies on how to leverage technology. They build their own learning networks and customize their learning environment. And so helping students take a little more ownership over their learning experience and putting them at the center. And teachers taking a more hands-off role, if you want to call it that. Digital citizenship, there's some overlap from the 2007 standards, but most of the 2007 standards are really packed into that top definition there. And the digital citizenship is directly related to the digital citizenship strand in the digital learning competencies for classroom teachers. Engage in a safe, positive, safe, legal, and ethical behavior when using technology. You can also throw that under, or talk about privacy rights, developing, as it says in A, developing and managing their digital identity. And so there's a lot of things here that teachers can model for students as well. Knowledge constructor, they renamed the research and information fluency strand to focus on generating and sharing of knowledge. But you'll see some of these exploring real-world issues, problems, developing ideas and theories. You'll see a lot of these it's kind of reading between the lines, where you still need to find, organize, analyze, synthesize, or evaluate, synthesize, and use information for a purpose. in order to do all of these things as a part of the knowledge constructor. But it does focus on the after you do that, after you find and organize and analyze and evaluate and synthesize. What do you do with it after that? Are you generating new knowledge, or are you just repeating what you've just learned, and how are you going to share it? So with the innovative designer and the computational thinker, I'll start with the computational thinker. Because this is where it goes hand in hand with the knowledge constructor. This is where all of the critical thinking and problem solving and decision making and kind of those, what I kind of, to use a rather simple way of thinking about, the boots on the ground skills, that the hard work, the elbow grease that gets jobs done or projects done. And so that's where all the sweat equity is put into a project. And then the innovative designer is kind of the standoffish approach. That's the project manager. No one use a deliberate design process for generating ideas, testing theories. If you use design thinking in your classes, that's one example. Develop, test, and refine prototypes. So you're trying different things out. You realize there's no one right answer, and it's all about the process. Things could change. There's a lot of things can be fluid. Projects can be fluid. New problems might arise. How are you going to deal with that? And then the computational thinker is all the in-between stuff that needs to get done by all of the group members to get a particular project done. The creative communicator and the global collaborator. Like I said, they split the two, communicator and collaborator strand from 2007 and ditched the technology operations and concepts. But those operations and concepts are in learning specific skills are still in these 7 new standards. And so, but you must keep in mind that you can't just teach technology in isolation. It has to be a part of a project. It has to be a part of a specific learning activity, because otherwise it loses its context. It loses its meaning, and might just cause only frustration if taught in a standalone course. But going back to the communicator and collaborator strand. So these are just extensions of the empowered learner strand that we looked at, that first one we looked at. Promote student voice, promote student agency, student motivation, give them more of an opportunity to take control and ownership over their learning environment. It's also an extension of the knowledge constructor. We're sharing and communicating of that knowledge. And so, like I said at the beginning, many of these 7 standards are overlapped with one another. There is one final thing I do want to say. These new standards do a wonderful job of focusing on putting the learner at the center, and hopefully taking a little closer look at these standards will give you some ideas on how to create a learning environment that empowers students and gives students a voice. Start to focus on not just the final product as a part of an activity or learning experience, but also the process of discovery and how to address situations that students weren't explicitly prepared for. But they have all of the tools to meet that challenge. So we'll kick back to the PowerPoint. And before I move on to the AASL standards. Does anybody have any questions on the ISTE standards? All right. So the AASL standards, uh, they're in the process of being updated, and the standards for the 21st century learner are going to be shared probably mid 2017, so the middle of this year. One of the things that you'll see with their defining of 9 foundational common beliefs is that they read as an advocacy piece for school librarians. And that's okay. Now that you know that, it's right there and you can take that into account. It puts it into a context. But in a lot of states, school librarians, and North Carolina does a better job than most. I taught in Arizona and in Michigan, and in both states, they were shedding school librarians as quickly as they can because they saw it as an easy way to save money on labor costs, which is very unfortunate. So much so that when I taught in Western Michigan, the county I was in, there were 21 school districts because there were 21 different localities, local education agencies, and only one of them stocked their schools, every school from K through 12, with a school librarian. And once you know, they had the highest test scores in the county, and for good reason. But these standards also help shape the library program and serve as a tool for school librarians to shape the learning experience of the students. And so it does a lot of good. And you'll see here the connections to the digital learning competencies, but also these are much less focused on technology skills and more on kind of the library side of things, more on reading, more on literacy, more of a focus on critical thinking and inquiry. And so when you combine the ISTE standards and the AASL standards, you get a pretty holistic view of the entire student on how they learn, pushes students to take responsibility for their own learning and actions, and give teachers opportunities to provide those opportunities for students to give ownership or take ownership over their own learning. So instead of, you guys know what skills, dispositions, responsibilities are, I'm going to go and get this out of the way. Here's the link for the ASL standards right here in the middle. Unlike ISTE, you don't have to hand over any personal information. And here are those common beliefs. Reading is a window to the world, and then I give a brief definition of what that looks like. Here's inquiry, provides a framework for learning. Ethical behavior, your digital citizenship. There is one rather technocentric thing, technology, focused on technology skills. Equitable access. Information literacy. So you'll see that expansion of information demands and the next common belief. So you see that these are rather different from the ISTE standards. And so they are more information focused, more reading focused. And that's okay. Not all standards need to be alike. And so, but just like the ISTE standards, students, the ASL standards ask students to follow an inquiry-based process in seeking knowledge in their subject area, whatever content that they're learning across the curriculum, and to start making real-world connections on how to use these processes in real life. So one of the things that they're going to revamp is the way these are communicated on the page. They're a bit tough to follow and rather small, but inquire, think critically, gain knowledge, follow an inquiry-based process in seeking knowledge. And so you'll see that some of these things you already do as a teacher. Find, evaluate, select appropriate sources to answer questions, evaluate information found, demonstrate mastery of technology tools for accessing information, pursuing inquiry. And so that's not just for the library, the school library's instruction program. That's something that needs to be enforced, not enforced, poor choice of words, but ingrained in the curricular subject areas by teachers as well. Think of it as a specific technology tool. If you just teach how students should use Orasma, the augmented reality app, but not put it into a context of how it benefits them as a learner, then learning how to use a piece of technology might not have as big of an effect as you had hoped. It's the same thing with types of skills that the ASL standards talk about. One thing I do like about the ASL standards are these self-assessment strategies to give teachers ideas of how to help students reflect on their own work and their own creations, and put more of that, so getting into the metacognitive stuff, thinking about thinking when you're thinking about thinking. Draw conclusions, inform decisions, apply knowledge to new situations, create new knowledge. You'll see there are some connections here to the ISTE standards. Share knowledge and participate ethically and productively as members of our democratic society. Digital citizenship. Demonstrate leadership and confidence by presenting ideas in both formal and informal settings. And so it's not just, they don't just focus on what happens inside the classroom. They try and relate everything to what the real world learning situations that students face outside the classroom. Speaking of which, I do want to point out one of these common beliefs up here. Learning has a social context, where ASL is recognizing that the social nature of learning, whether it's the student-to-student interactions in a classroom, the teacher and student interaction in formal learning settings, or even outside of school, there is a social context. Students, most learning doesn't happen all by itself in a room, where somebody's just reading a book. There's usually some type of social component. That's why Facebook is so popular, or at least with the older crowd, or why all of these messaging apps are popular, or why texting and driving is such a problem, because it's that human need to have social connections. So if you're familiar with your learning theorists, you've got constructivism, coined by Vygotsky, where you get this iteration in your constructing knowledge. It's about the process, and you're building on what came before. About 20 years ago or so now, you've got George Siemens, a Canadian researcher that coined the term social constructivism, in trying to recognize that social aspect to learning. And then more recently, Stephen Downes, another Canadian researcher, who talked about connectivism, and really focusing on those connections that people make when they're learning, whether it's in a formal or an informal experience. And Stephen Downes and George Siemens were some of the driving forces behind the first MOOCs the first MOOC back in 2008. 2009, even before Harvard and MIT got on board in 2011. Any questions about the AASL standards? Before we dive into the North Carolina Information and Technology Essential Standards. I'm not the biggest fan of the North Carolina Information and Technology Essential Standards. They've been in use since 2011, and when I say that the standards represents the must-have skills and knowledge critical for student success, I'm talking about the basic, bare minimum, very prescriptive and specific technology skills students need to be successful in today's classroom. There wasn't a lot of vision in these standards, and they've become outdated very quickly. They need a refresh. So what I'm going to focus on with these standards is that bottom part, that bottom quote. It's essential that classroom teachers collaborate with school library media coordinators, and this comes from the state DPI, and instructional technology facilitators in delivering instruction. And it's a great way to model for your students how the modern workplace functions. It's not just one person anymore. It can't be, especially in schools. Teachers cannot become proficient in every little piece of technology or every new app that comes out that students like. It's too much. And so there needs to be that collaboration. And even if you don't have instructional technology facilitators in your school, or your county only has, similar to Pitt County, only has 2 or 3 for all of the schools within the district, your school library media coordinator it probably has become the de facto instructional technology facilitator in your school. And hopefully you have one of a school librarian there to help you out. And in many cases, the school librarian has also become the de facto IT person as well for computer troubles or fixing the copier. But focus on start getting the wheels turning on how school librarians or your instructional technology facilitators can be active participants in curricular planning, planning group activities, analyzing student data, identifying learning goals, planning and delivering instruction, and then assessing student progress. It's a team game, and there are plenty, even if it's another teacher and co-teaching, it's something we can all help each other with to make more meaningful learning experiences for our students. So instead of going through these progressions, because they do have these curricular objectives, which help a little bit from K through 5, and they break them up into age groups, which is good. But they're very, like I said, they're very prescriptive, they're very basic, very skills focused, the must-have minimum skills. The strand alignment forms aren't very helpful. So I'll kick you the link to ITES standards. The best thing that's on this page, I believe somebody in Randolph County, I forget her name, I'll have to go back and look, aligned the AASL, excuse me, the 2007 ISTE standards and the North Carolina Information Technology Essential Standards. And so you can see how things kind of line up. But even if you don't have an instructional technology consultant or have very many of them in your school district, the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction's Digital Teaching and Learning Wiki has a ton of information and resources. There's even a dedicated digital teaching and learning specialist for your area. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, covering 8 regions across the state. So I encourage you to check this out. And not only do you have resources and support through this wiki, you please feel free to email me and ask me for help as well if you have any questions. So the other thing I want to touch bases on is, and this is the final thing, help you make some connections with the teacher evaluation rubric. And I could go on and on. This could be a whole nother hour-long session. But I'll go through the first couple of standards and show you how some of these digital learning competencies or some of these standards that you can use to, one, create activities for, and two, help show as and submit as artifacts where you've accomplished or are distinguished in a particular standard and element. So even creates a classroom culture that empowers students to collaborate. And a lot of you already do this. Like I said, I'm sure talking today has thrown on a light bulb or two, say, oh, I already do this. I already align to that standard, so in a specific learning activity. And so those information and technology standards do focus on empower students to collaborate, encourage students to take responsibility for their own learning. Holly Fales, an instructional technology consultant over in the College of Ed, she focuses, the Teacher Toolbox, she focuses on assessment using digital tools. So there's another option for you. Element 1C here promotes positive working relationships through professional growth activities in collaboration, co-teaching with your school librarian or instructional technology facilitator. Being a part of the Teacher Toolbox series, or if you've signed up for the Eastern North Carolina Instructional Technology Collaborative professional learning group, that's promoting those positive work relationships as well. Element 2B promotes a deep understanding of cultures through integration of culturally sensitive materials and ideas throughout the curriculum. The AASL standards will help you accomplish that through your student work and develop some learning activities where you can show proof that you've done that. And that's not even before we get into the technology-specific learning standards. So one last thing I'll mention, if I remember where it is, 3D. Deepen students' understanding of 21st century skills. And so especially, like I said, using the ISTE and the ASL standards combined gives you a holistic view of the student learning experience. And puts the student at the center of the learning experience, and focuses on the process rather than the specific skills. So they're making these connections and developing new skills through that. And if you want more specific things about and how these information and technology standards can assist you with your evaluation. I've got my own all marked up, and just give me a holler through email, and I can show you some other examples. So while you're thinking of any last questions, as I begin to wrap things up in the last few minutes here, I'll remind you so Dolores, I can help you, I can give you some general things, but I think your some more experience. I can give you some general things on how you can use the integration of technology in your classroom and how they align to specific elements within your evaluation. You would need to talk to a more experienced. You might have to talk to a more experienced teacher at your school or an administrator for some more specific information for your context. Okay, yeah, just follow up with me via email, and I can give you some more general things on how the information and technology standards can align to certain points in the evaluation rubric. So there's the professional learning community. I know some of you have already signed up for that, where you attend 6 of these professional development sessions for 0.6 CEUs. So the rubric I pulled up is from the North Carolina teachers, or evaluating North Carolina teachers. And here I still have the tab up. I'll send you the link. So I pulled this, excuse me, I pulled this out of this is pulled out of the North Carolina teacher evaluation process handbook, which is about 80 pages long. And then they also shared this rubric separately. They pulled it out of that handbook, and it's a web form that you can actually fill out. So you can earn up to 1 CEU with us by attending 6 sessions, and then the other 0.4 CEUs. What we have in mind is use an idea or a technology standard or a technology tool that you learn about in one of those 6 online PD sessions. Choose one, develop a lesson plan, share it with your peers, teach that lesson plan, and then write a reflection on how it went, all the good, the bad, and the ugly, what you learned from that experience. And then interact with your peers within our professional learning community that we've developed here at ECU on our course site. So hopefully it'll be a good experience. You guys are our pilot group. Ed Camp is coming up on April 8th. It's a free professional development, participant-driven professional development program for educators here in Eastern North Carolina. It's another 0.6 CEUs. And that is all I have. I'm right on time, 4:30. Does anybody have any last questions? That's great, Mary Jo. I look forward to meeting you there. So Rosie, did you try to sign up for the professional learning community through the through the online store that you had signed up for this session with, and it wouldn't let you do it. It wouldn't let you add it to your cart. I'll make a note of it here, and then I'll touch bases with my colleagues over in the College of Ed and let them know that there might be an issue with it. So if there's no other questions, that's all I have for you today. I'll have to look into that, Rosie. I wasn't aware that we were putting a cap on enrollment for that, but it's possible since this is our first go around with it. They might have put a cap on enrollment. And I think we already have 20 people signed up. Yes, I'll share your email with my colleagues over in the College of Ed, and hopefully we can get it worked out. So that's all I have for today. Thank you very much, everybody, for stopping by. And have a great weekend.